the difficult path to resolve these global problems is that you have to start rethinking the idea of 400 years of nation states, which were very good at the beginning. They did, but today they have many flaws in the underlying reality that we have today.
Hey everybody, it's Scott Leckie again from Democracy Tomorrow. I'm here today with my co-author, Pablo Rueda, who's speaking to us from Uruguay in South America. Last year, we wrote a book together called One Earth, One Politics, Building Our Shared Path Towards World Citizenship, which is here. It's published by the wonderful publishing house Ethics Press in the United Kingdom, and it has just gone paperback. So we thought we would take that opportunity today, now that the book is available in paperback, to just very briefly go through the basic messages that we hope to impart with this book, which is really closely linked to the objectives that we have with this channel, which is promoting the idea that everybody, everywhere, should have access to a fully functioning, fully transparent, corruption-free, fraud-free democratic system. So first of all, Pablo in Uruguay, welcome back to Democracy Tomorrow. How's life today?
Life is good, Scott. A pleasure to be with you, my co-author and very good friend, to discuss about our book. Also to mention that we are working in the translation of the book in Spanish, and the name will be Un Planeta, Un Estado.
Great. Yeah, I look forward, and hopefully viewers will look forward who speak Spanish to reading the Spanish version, and hopefully that'll be the first of many translations down the road. So, we wrote this book really to consolidate a bunch of ideas that we've had and been discussing for years now, and we just wanted to give you a brief overview of what the book looks like and sort of some of the issues that we address. So the book begins really by giving an overview of the current state of the world in terms of how we organize ourselves politically. I mean, this is such a dominant theme that few of us even ever think about it. We just are born in a nation state and we become a citizen of that nation state, and that's generally how we all live out our lives in the world today. This is the Westphalian system of governance in the world. We now have 193 member states of the United Nations. Remember that when the United Nations started, there were only 51 nation states, so that has almost quadrupled in size over the last 80 years, reminding you, of course, that in just 2.5 weeks, the 80th anniversary of the UN Charter and the founding of the United Nations will occur. All of us see the world through the lenses of the nation states in which we were born or where we live, the small percentage of the human race that moved from their country of birth. And Pablo and my idea is following on the shoulders of many throughout millennia, that we need to consistently analyze whether this is really the best way to organize ourselves politically, given the fact that we all share the same planet. So we propose a whole series of steps that can be taken to transcend, essentially, the nation-state model, which, of course, has been proposed for millennia, as I said, starting with Socrates, of course, with his famous line, "I am neither Athenian nor Greek, I am a citizen of the world," and countless others since then. But for some reason, our species, Homo sapiens, has not been able to make that leap. We've made lots of partial leaps, but we haven't completely made the jump from nation state to a world citizenship situation whereby all of us share the same nationality. And the book starts with that. Now, Pablo, what is it that drew you to this idea that we need to think about moving beyond where we are today? We've known each other for a very long time, but only in very recent years did we begin discussing this idea of world citizenship as such. And both of us came at it from very different perspectives and angles, or let's say influences. But maybe you can just talk for a minute or two about what your main influences were in coming to the conclusion that this is the preferred way to move forward for our species.
Well, I believe I have a tendency to try to resolve matters in a deep and definitive way rather than taking simplistic solutions to the problem, probably because I am a lawyer and I'm constantly having to do that as my work. And I think it's an issue of timing. Today, the planet is working outside the boundaries of the nation states. You see that in the environmental consequences of our development. You see that in crime, in international crime, and crimes workers in technology that are all done in a way in which frontiers do not exist. Uh, you see that in the inequality that you see today, that is not an inequality of countries, it's a global inequality problem that you have to deal. And so it is the difficult path to resolve these global problems is that you have to start rethinking the idea of 400 years of nation states, which were very good at the beginning. They did, but today they have many flaws in the underlying reality that we have today.
Right. And I think, just to put it into perspective, you mentioned the idea of international crime, for instance. We can apply this to climate change. Also, we can apply it to nuclear weapons technology. We can apply it to AI. We can apply it to growing authoritarianism and autocracy. But let's just take one example, because one of the arguments, of course, against this idea is that by having a range of different power centers in the world becomes balanced in the end. So when one section becomes more powerful, the others can work together to keep that one power from gaining too much power, and so on and so forth. So an equilibrium is created by virtue of the fact that there are a series of different power centers. And one could say there's the United States / Western power sector. There's the global South, which is a power sector. There's Russia and its allies as a power sector. There's China and its allies as a power sector. There's the European Union as a power sector. So all of them kind of work systematically to create some degree of equilibrium, so that there's not a single one of them can become all too powerful and conquer the rest of the world. So there's value in that argument, I believe, and of course, there's a reason that the world has become the way it has. At the same time, however, so much of that system which we currently maintain really is based on, a denial of the fact that we're all human beings in the first place, that we're all residents of the same planet in the first place, and that one group gaining power means that another group will have reduced power in the end. And it's premised on this idea that has been ever present in so much of human history of empire. And maybe it's not a global empire necessarily, but the aspiration of so many countries and so many power structures to become an empire, as if they're going to dominate and control the world, seems to have been with us forever and seems to not be diminishing at all. So we now live in a world where clearly the U.S. empire, and it is an empire, whether they believe it or not, there's no question that the United States is the dominant superpower and has been, particularly since the end of the Cold War, but really since the end of World War II, is clearly on the wane. It is decreasing by the minute, I would say, right now. I mean, this is not accepted by many Americans, but I hate to break it to America, but your empire is declining. despite the fact that you may hear otherwise from the political leadership in that country. Clearly, in the view of the rest of the world, the U.S. empire is declining. Conversely, China is doing what it can to increase its global prominence and clearly has some measure of imperial aspirations. Russia does too. India does also, to a degree, a minor degree by comparison. The global south may have some aspirations. Maybe the oil-producing countries have aspirations to become empires. Maybe the Ottoman Empire wants to be reestablished by the current government of Turkey. The list goes on and on and on, you know? And I think part of the reason, I know at least for me, that I'm so interested in this topic and decided to write a book on it and form organizations about it is because I don't think the way forward is empire. I think we have had a historical period, you know, much like the colonial period or much like the feudal period or whatever previous periods we've had in history, epochs really. I think the time for the imperial period has ended and should end. And rather than one country or one group of countries trying to seek domination over the rest, we need a system that is simply premised not on our differences, but on our similarities. And our similarities are infinitely greater in number than our differences. You know, it doesn't matter that Pablo happens to be born in Argentina and is sitting in another continent than where I'm sitting now, and I was born in a different country than him. It doesn't matter at all, you know? And I think to most people, most places, those things don't matter really. You know, what really matters is our shared humanity and whether we're respectful of one another and are curious to know about every other person and feel a degree of responsibility towards them and towards building a society, a global society and a planet that can, you know, protect and preserve life and move things forward. And I think one of the key points we make at the beginning of the book is that the current system is almost doomed to fail in the end, because we are, exactly as you said, we are over exploiting the finite resources of this planet and causing harm, whether it's to the oceans. And I should note that the World Oceans Conference is starting today in Nice in France, and they're trying to conclude a plastics treaty and a number of other initiatives to protect the oceans. You know, the majority of our planet is covered by oceans, by the way, 72% of it. It's largely unprotected. That and climate change and, you know, air pollution, 99% of the world's population, according to World Health Organization figures, is breathing air at a quality less than international standards dictate. 1% of the human race breathes clean air. This can't go on. And so the status quo is just not good enough. And one final point, and I'll let you come in here on this, just on the introduction to the idea. How can it be that we have an international financial system that allows not only the formation of incredible amounts of wealth at the top of the global financial pyramid, but where tax havens, despite efforts to end them, exist in more than 50 jurisdictions, I believe. I think it's 58 jurisdictions have absolute banking secrecy where people can hide their money from their own national governments and avoid paying tax on it. You know, you can't have a global system of governance where you allow all of these escape hatches, right, essentially. And nation states are, yes, protective of people, and they're meant to protect their citizens, but they can also become escape hatches. So if let's just say Uruguay decided to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1%, a lot of those people would perhaps move to a lower tax jurisdiction or seek to hide their money in a tax haven, which is so easily accessible if you know what you're doing. And so, you know, that's just one of the ways in which a global system could, you know, shut down these escape hatches that allow and actually even promote and facilitate international crime.
Absolutely. That's a very good example how nation states cannot resolve today the problems of today that are global problems. And if you put nation states to resolve global problems, you see that nation states have a principle, a main principle of what a politician, a representative of the people of a nation state might do, is to protect the national interest. That's the main guidance any leader must have of a nation state. So if you put all nation states to protect their own national interest, you cannot resolve problems that are global because you will find always someone saying drill baby drill, and I will benefit and I will make my citizens benefit to take the shortcut of being the only one that do not abide to something that resolves the global problem. And you will have that because it's the duty of the leader to protect and reaffirm the national interest. So
Yeah.
they cannot resolve nation states global problems with nation states, and that's a real problem. It is true that to have several nation states creates a benefit of check and balances between the countries. And that is a reality, that the construction of a global government has the need to create check and balances that are different to those existing in a planet divided by nation states. So that is why we wrote the book. We are aware of that, and we are also aware that most of us are global citizens and want to resolve global problems. But if you create a central power, most of the people that will like to be in that power will be the psychopaths that we have today in the different nation states that want to take power and want to be greedy and want to use that power on their benefit. So it is true that this is a difficult path, the construction of a global government. And needs to be that is why it needs to be discussed, needs to be tested slowly, progressively, so that it is very clear that the global power will be used to resolve global problems and not to create additional global problems.
Right. And I think one of the, challenges with this whole idea is that it immediately sends shivers of fear down the spines of people when they hear the term global government or world state or world citizen. The immediate reaction, the gut reaction of many people is, "Oh no, I don't want that. That's terrible. It means a global dictatorship. It means all freedom is taken away. It means a totalitarian structure that will never be able to be broken. It's absolutely a bad idea. We need to have all these different vying interests, and only in that way can we, build the prosperity that people need." And part of the reason that we wrote the book is to show that it's understandable that people have that thought, but it's very flawed when you start breaking it apart and you start looking at the component elements of what a global government per se would look like. We're nowhere near a global government now. Some people would say, we have the United Nations. The United Nations is anything but a global government. The United Nations is a coming together of nation states, each representing their own national interests, and sometimes they agree. Sometimes they cooperate and collaborate, most of the time, actually. But that collaboration is not sufficient, clearly. Just look at the de facto reality of the world, and you will see that the current structures have not been able to solve some of the most pressing problems facing humanity that threatens our very existence as a species. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. Our extinction is on the table as a possibility unlike ever before. And that is not something that we want to really contemplate. And, you know, but the vested interest that you were just talking about, every country is out for itself. It's understandable that the very nature of this system is predicated on that. And, you know, it's very important to point out, too, most countries in the world are actually quite small. There's only a small number of countries that have a really huge population. Most countries are 1 million or 5 million or 8 million or 10 million, like your country, where you're living now, 3.5 million. You know, my country, 27 million. It's a lot, but it's still tiny compared to India or China, Indonesia, you know, United States. Most countries are a lot smaller, and their sovereignty is precious and must be protected. So the goal of global governance is not to take away sovereignty of countries or to allow them to be subsumed into a larger neighboring country. Like the United States has mentioned it wishes to do with Greenland and Canada recently. You know, that is absolutely not the objective at all. The objective here is for people across the world, and we believe the numbers of people that see the world this way is far larger than most people realize. Some sort of voluntary union of like-minded people that understand the value of a global governance system, that voluntarily opt in to a system that would eventually, down the road, be premised on this objective of having this global system. Having a global government system doesn't mean there's one political party. It means there's probably 1,000 political parties. It doesn't mean there's one overseeing lord-like figure that dominates everything in a dictatorial manner. Not at all. Maybe there's no leadership even needed. Maybe there's a rotating presidency which changes every month. There's all sorts of models that can be developed. But the bottom line is, how do we solve really horrible climate change? And the numbers get worse every day without some sort of authority that says, okay, CO2 emissions are too high and must stop. You know, voluntarily doing it isn't going to do it. We are destroying the oceans. The last frontier of our planet are being destroyed by trawlers dragging fishing nets across the floor of the ocean and ruining it forever. The Arctic is melting. Antarctica is melting. Conflict is breaking out everywhere. There's never been more displaced people than now. A huge portion of planet Earth's land surface is officially declared to be degraded. The inequality levels have never come anywhere near where they are today. The list goes on and on and on. And we haven't even started talking about AI and the potential harm that it could cause. It could cause a lot of good things, but it could just as easily cause a lot of unimaginably bad things. So, you know, the book starts with this kind of overview, and then we get into this idea in chapter 2 of this concept that we came up with, which is called Jus Gaia. So most citizenship that you have, listeners, viewers, is based on the legal principle called jus sanguinis. So citizenship based on your blood, so that your parents, or jus soli, which means the place where you were born. That's how most citizenships are created. There's new proposals to have a new concept called jus nexi, which is like a meaningful relationship to the particular place. That's particularly for a migrant, that somebody moves to a third country. And our proposal is that there should be something called jus Gaia. So a legal system of thinking, a legal notion that bases our citizenship not on parents, not on the country in which we were born, not on meaningful links to that country, but the simple fact that we are born on the same planet. So we propose a whole series of ways by which this could be implemented. Some of them immediate, some of them long-term, some of them converting current nationalities into a global nationality, sometimes keeping your own nationality but adding to it with an international identity, on and on. And so that's one of the very concrete proposals we make in terms of practically how do you move from a nation state individual citizenship system into a more global system, because very often the arguments against a global government or a world parliament, etc., are based on the premise that it's unreasonable and, oh, that would be great, but it'll never happen, kind of thing. But it can happen if enough of us want it to happen. So we explore that. And then maybe, Pablo, you can introduce what Chapter 3 is about, where we talk a lot about global voting and the idea of a digital people's assembly.
Okay, let me make a comment on Chapter 2 regarding global citizenship. And that is that it is a required condition of global government. You cannot have global government without global citizenship. So it is necessary to first attack the issue of global citizenship to be able to talk later about constructing a global government. And it is very clear that we are not proposing global citizenship to exclude other nation state citizenship. Our idea is not to put in global government all matters related to the planet, but only to put those matters that refer to global issues. All matters of regions and countries can continue being organized as they are today. What they are saying that this structure cannot resolve the many global problems that we have today. For that, we have global government, and to have global government, we need global citizenship. And to have global citizenship and global government, what we analyze in the book is that what many things that couldn't be done in the past can be done today because our technological evolution. That is why our economy, our technology, our information has eliminated boundaries because something has changed, and today we operate as a planet underlying. So we have the tools to take our citizenship structure and our voting structure using the tools of technology of today and information technology and AI into using well these tools, we can construct much easier than in the past a global citizenship and global voting and institution. Imagine before to have a record of all citizens in the world in paper. It would have been impossible to send the records by ship to a central authority. It would have been impossible. Today we can do it easily. And today, going to Chapter 3, we can vote easily. What we need to do is to use and benefit from artificial intelligence to create algorithms and technology that would allow us to have transparent voting systems on a global scale. And that can be done. And to that also is important to mention that the use of this artificial technology in public purposes will allow the society to construct a lot of algorithms that are not constructed solely for economical purposes. It's like the use of nuclear technology for generating electricity allows the humans to learn how to use nuclear energy to things that is not only to drop a bomb and kill people. So technology will benefit from this because there will be a lot of investment in technology that has a public purpose. and the algorithms will be built to allow transparency, to allow objectivity, and not to be solely driven by commercial purposes.
Right, right. And, it's important also to make the point that not every single issue that affects you is going to be subject to any sort of international voting system. In fact, the overwhelming majority of issues that affect you and your neighborhood and your immediate environment will be decided by you, whoever you are. So, deciding on how often the rubbish removal trucks come to your house, or when to repair your local road, or whether you're going to decide to protect your coastline or let it be overrun by rising sea levels, et cetera, or local economic decisions will be made by local municipalities as they are today. And sometimes it'll be a slightly larger political body that decides things. But for truly global issues, international peace and security, international environmental stability, protection of the oceans, protection of the common heritage of mankind, protection of all of these types of things, by its very nature, should be subject to the international will of the people. And then measures to protect human rights, measures to promote greater equality, measures to prosecute war criminals and crimes against humanity and other international crimes. All of those things are appropriate for international attention. And using iPhones, using AI, using other methods of fraud-free voting, it's not a foolproof system now. It's not perfect, but we can at least begin exploring it. There was a really interesting global survey that was taken recently by the UN about whether the world should do more to protect against the effects of climate change. And they found, I think it was 64 or 68% of the people that voted on this thing, and it was a truly global vote. I mean, it was unofficial, obviously, but the overwhelming majority of people said, yes, we should do more. So we're envisaging something like that initially, in particular, like an international public opinion survey that can then guide, decision making. And then down the road, at some point, who knows? Maybe it will be an international election like we all have national elections in the countries that actually carry those out, which would have been an impossible dream just 200 or 300 years ago. How could you possibly ask the serfs and peasants whether they want to vote for somebody to be the leader of the country? That would be considered absolutely outlandish idea, And then all sorts of revolutions happened and political developments happened and so on and so forth. And it's not such a radical idea after all, it turns out, And perhaps the same trajectory will accompany this idea. And that leads us to what we wrote in chapter 4, which is this idea of having a world parliament. And there are countless models out there. There's no single model or blueprint that says this is the way. There are lots of current models that say you should have a General Assembly, like the General Assembly in the UN. You keep it. It's comprised of nation states. But next to that, you should have a parliamentary assembly, which is based upon the will and wishes of the people who are directly elected to represent citizens as opposed to nation states. And those two bodies could work side by side, like a bicameral government, like a House of Representatives and a Senate, for instance. Another option is that you actually have a proportional global parliament based upon the amount of people living in current nation states. Others say there should be a system where it's exclusively based on one's status as a world citizen. You don't vote as a Chinese national or an Indian national or an Australian national. You vote as a world citizen. And then you get the representation that the world as a whole votes for. And yes, there will be a conservative political faction. There will be a progressive political faction. There will be a totally Green Party-oriented environmental faction. There will be some more nationalistically inclined ones. There will be those who oppose the system and want to overturn it. There will be everything. It's not like all things are going to, outright fascism, excluded, prevented. Outright Nazism, prevented. Outright racist parties, prevented. all of these unacceptable things will indeed be prevented. But anything that's within the acceptable range, as defined by international law and human rights law and basic reasonableness, will be accepted, of course. And all of these views will be aired within the international body that's eventually decided. But, the point to be made here is that if we're not able, just look at the United Nations Security Council and its functions now. That's as close as we can get now to a rules-based body that is meant to maintain international peace and security. It is a fundamental body. And yet, 5 countries have veto rights over any decision of this body. And the veto right, there's 5 countries, of course, the P5 they're called, the United States, China, the United Kingdom, France, and Russia, of course. Any one of those countries that wishes to block action by the Security Council, remember the Security Council can ask for military intervention, it can demand the cessation of hostilities, it can demand the removal of troops from a country that's being occupied. They can do almost anything. But 5 countries can block everything. Yesterday or the day before, there was a vote at the Security Council, for instance, the most recent one, which demanded a ceasefire in Gaza. It was 14-1. All 14 members voted yes, ceasefire now. The United States voted against it by issuing its veto power. So we need obviously to get rid of this veto power, because if anything comes up on Ukraine in the Security Council now, Russia will veto it. Nothing will happen. Anything was ever to come up on Tibet, China would veto it. Anything that came up about, let's say, an overseas territory of France, of which they have many, many, many thousands of kilometers away from the territory of France, they will veto it. Mostly it tends to be the United States, number 1 veto issuer by a mile.
Protecting its national interest.
And not agreed by a large number of people as well, even within that country. But that system clearly needs to be, altered, and we probably need to get rid of any sort of we definitely need to get rid of any veto powers within any eventual world parliament. But the point to be made here really is that unless the current power structures at the international level are capable of actually solving these existentially serious problems, we obviously need something better and something that works more. So we just ask everybody who reads this book or who thinks about these things, imagine what it could be and put your ideas on the table and start discussing it and seeing where we can get, because the sooner we act, the better, because we are indeed running out of time.
And in that point, Scott, there is we mention in the book another alternative, that is to resort to direct democracy. The representative democracy was originated in the impossibility of having the people exercising their power to govern all together. They needed to select representatives because at that time the system couldn't work by everyone participating. Today, because of technology, that can be done. So the principles of an executive, a legislature, and a judicial power, at the level at least of the legislature or Congress, you can avoid that institution and have direct democracy through technology. And that can be done. People can decide laws and decisions by themselves. That's part of what may happen in our planet in the future because of our status of evolution of today.
Yeah, that's right. And also it's important to point out that even with direct international democracy, which is now technologically possible, it's not like every single person is going to be asked every single day to vote on something. It's not going to be that much different from what it is now in terms of frequency of elections, maybe a little bit more. But at the very beginning, at least, I mean, we kind of proposed this idea of an occasional international opinion poll, perhaps 4 times a year, where you just get a message on your phone and you have 2 weeks to vote, and you issue your opinion about, should we devote a higher proportion of global revenue to fixing land that's been degraded by poor agricultural activities, for instance? Should we do more to reduce CO2 emissions? Should we do more to promote nuclear disarmament? Should we do more to prevent countries from illegally occupying other countries? Should we do more to stop ethnic cleansing, etc.?
Let me add a little comment. When democracy commenced and the power was moved from the king to the people, the first thing those intellectuals realized is that they had to educate, because without public education, they couldn't construct a democracy. And the same is today. When we talk about direct voting, we are also talking about, okay, but it's not as simple as putting a decision to be voted. This needs a lot of work in artificial intelligence, so that that person voting globally can be correctly informed of the different effects, alternative positions that that decision takes. And that can be done today globally.
I mean, you know, obviously the whole issue of media disinformation and manipulation of algorithms and all of the very present things that are happening in elections across the world now have to be tackled. And there has to be some way, I don't know the precise technological way to fight against this, but I'm sure experts do. But we need clearly to have a system that removes money from politics, basically, removes private interest from the public interest that politics is meant to be. And that would be one positive step. And in fact, that's one of the things we happen to address in the next chapter, which is about establishing quality control criteria for aspiring politicians. And we did a podcast on this a week or two ago. But, you know, just to make the point, first of all, the removal of private money from politics has to be tackled urgently in every country in the world. The elections should be entirely publicly financed. All private money should be removed, full stop. It's the only just and legitimate way to ensure that the will of the people is met. Because so much of that money is spent manipulating the minds of people that simply don't know better or don't want to know better. So that's one thing. More importantly, in terms of this chapter, is the idea that so many people in your life, whoever you may be watching and listening and wherever you may be watching, you want your medical doctor to have gone to school for a very long time before they treat you and diagnose your illness. You want the nurse that's looking after you in hospital to have received proper medical training to treat you. You want your banker to know what they're talking about when they are giving financial advice to you. You want the mechanic on your car to have been trained how to fix a internal combustion engine, and the list goes on and on and on. You want the people in the factory that made the processed food that you might be serving your children to ensure that it's produced in a way that's not going to make them sick. You want the sanitation engineers that are looking after sanitation in your country to know what they're doing. You want to know that anybody that can possibly have a negative impact on your life is trained and subject to some sort of standard that they need to attain before they can do the things that can either help you or hinder you. Very few such tests apply when it comes to politicians. Other than age and a few other limitations, in Australia, for instance, in some jurisdictions, if you're bankrupt, you can't run for office. If you're in prison, you can't run for office. There's a few other criteria here and there. But there's very little that says you must have received certain training before you can become a politician. You have to have only a certain amount of money, and if you have any amount above that, you might be excluded from entering politics because clearly you're not going to be able to act in the public interest, and so on and so forth. Added to that, the system of the nation state, as you said earlier, Pablo, it almost encourages the emergence of charismatic figures to rise to the surface, because that's what it takes in order to achieve political power. You have to be charismatic, you have to be energetic, you have to be dramatic, you have to, get attention from the media, so on and so forth. So somebody who's just a boring, super brilliant technocrat who may have all the answers will never enter politics because they don't have the charisma required to do it. So there are fundamental flaws in this system. So we propose a whole series of criteria that should be met before people are able to enter the political arena. And this is not a way of keeping certain ideologies out of power or anything like that. It's just to show that politics should be public service. That is what it is meant to be. You are meant to serve the public in a democratic system. You're not out for yourself. You're not in politics to be corrupt and to be fraudulent, unlike many leaders of today. You're meant to be there servicing the needs of people who need your assistance. And so that's what we propose in that chapter. And then in chapter 6, we talk about this idea. It's a pretty radical idea. Maybe you can elaborate on it more, Pablo, but basically, we all were born on planet Earth. Planet Earth is, as much as it may not seem to be so, it is a finite entity. There is only so much water. There's only so much oil. There's only so much clean air. There's only so much rocks and gold and everything else. It's finite. Yes, you can produce food each year and things like that, but the basic underlying resource structure of our planet is finite. And we're treating it as if it's infinite. So is it possible to envisage a world whereby people are not allowed to endlessly consume anything they wish to do so as long as they can afford to pay for it? Because that is the system we have today. A billionaire or somebody with lots of money quite literally could buy 20,000 cars tomorrow and fill them all with petrol and have their friends drive them all around. And they could buy 20,000 steaks and store them away and eat them for dinner, even though, red meat is one of the most methane and CO2 creating industries in the world. They can consume whatever they wish to do so as long as they can afford to do so, while a huge proportion of the human race is barely scraping by with enough money to get just food on the table once or twice a day. So maybe add a few comments on that idea of setting limits on individual consumption.
Yes, here is a typical and very clear example of how nation states foster the overconsumption and the contamination of the world. Because what the nation state purpose is, in their national interest, is to increase consumption every time, to make the country richer than the neighbor that is competing. So in a nation state structure where you have global capitalism and nation states, the system works to foster each country to consume more to be better than the other one. And that's a problem. And the solution is clear. You need to have global institutions to resolve this global problem of overconsumption. It's the only way. Through nation state, you will never resolve it.
The entire economic system now is based on the need for economic growth, which means the need to consume more. And in fact, in some countries, particularly the United States, but I think other ones as well, people aren't even referred to as citizens anymore. They're referred to as consumers, And I believe about 2/3 of the U.S. economy is based on consumption, rather than production of new products and things like that. But it's the actual consumption of buying things by people is what drives the economy. So the goal is to get more people to buy more things. And it doesn't matter if they're plastic bottles that destroy the world. It doesn't matter if it's petrol, which destroys the CO2 levels. It doesn't matter if it's meat. It doesn't matter if it's highly processed foods. It doesn't matter if it's non-renewable washing machines that break after a year and you throw them away. Whatever it may be, anything that's produced and consumed is counted as growth, even if it's bad for the environment and the system. So, we don't want to have a system like occurred during the Second World War or other situations where you have, a rationing system or something like that, like happened in the Soviet Union sometimes in Eastern Europe during the Cold War or during World War II in much of the world. Not at all, but we do want to draw attention to the fact that, some people can consume endlessly with all of the negative consequences of that. And the hugest chunk of humanity can consume almost nothing at all. That's the world we have. So we don't necessarily propose that every single poor person in the world should consume as much as the rich person, because that would be an environmental catastrophe. But we have to find a way where there's more equality and equity in the consumption of goods and services, but that they're able to consume goods and services that are not environmentally harmful or hurting the planet as a whole, but that there are some sort of limits put on how much oil an individual person can burn in their lifetime, for instance, or anything else.
You have speed limits when you drive. We like very much and we defend liberty. But liberty is not an absolute concept. It's a concept that has to be placed with other principles like not harming others. Because all this overconsumption harms others. And those externalities of the overconsumption are not recognized in prices. So they will be continued all the time until you include the externality in the price, or you have a global system that put limits, rationality in how this overconsumption works.
We want ultimately, a system that is maximally free, but with requisite responsibility at the same time. And the problem with so many externalities, the economic term externalities, the consequences of consumption, are not noticed or paid attention to at all by the person consuming. Most people in the world that are able to fly airplanes as passengers, which is a minority of the human race, still, those people are not really thinking about the emissions that are taking place to get them from place A to place B. They might a little bit think about it, and they might pay a little bit of extra to have a carbon offset. But most people, it's not a huge consideration. That's just one example of many. We need to come to the point where more and more people realize that consumption is almost impossible as a sort of win-win proposition under the current system. There are costs to one's consumption, and we simply need a better way. Again, you can't have infinite consumption in a finite system. And if we want to have that, then we're simply digging our own, collective grave. So we're almost at the end of the book now. Chapter 7 is educating for world citizenship. So what do you think about that one, Pablo?
Well, that's probably the one, if not the most important, one of the most important issues of today, because we are in a situation in the planet in which we are near the post-industrial revolution, when Marx was predicating that the consequence of industrial revolution will be the proletarian totalitarianism and a dictatorship. The reason for that was that the industrial revolution created an enormous inequality. But that was somehow resolved by the Europeans at that time when they accepted to surrender part of the wealth created by the Industrial Revolution and surrender also the wealth of their heirs, their future generations, in order to construct a social state that will include into the benefits of the Industrial Revolution all, mostly all. And today we are somehow in the same. The technological revolution has created an enormous inequality, and we have to resolve that problem because the consequences of that will be very hard to the planet. And the way to resolve it today is not the same, but comparable to that of the post-industrial revolution. What happens today is that public education and the educational system in the whole consolidates inequality more than resolves inequality uh, because of introducing neoliberalist and liberty into the educational system. We have allowed to segregate the population in educational institutions in those that have opportunity and go to private schools and university, and those without opportunity that goes to public schools that before were created to be very good and insert people into capitalism and the benefits of the industrial revolution, and today work all the contrary. Work as if you go to a public school, you will have no opportunity. If you go to a private school and a private university, you will have opportunity. So the educational system is the principal responsible of the segregation, the consolidation of the inequality created by the technological revolution. You can justify inequality in the technological revolution because if you don't put in, if you don't give reward to innovation, you will not have that innovation, that creation. Okay, but there is no reason to justify the transfer of all that wealth to future generations that have not participated in that innovation, in that competition. They just receive it for free. And that is what the educational institutions are doing today. And what we are proposing is to change that. A system that would allow that in the educational system, everybody has to be educated with the same academic levels and tools so that when they leave the educational system, they will have all, whatever their economic position, an equal opportunity to compete among each other.
Right, because we're about as far from that as could be now. I mean, it's the most unequal playing field that you could ever imagine. And of course, another element that I always like to add to educational discussions is to ask people, how much information did you receive as a student from kindergarten all the way until your university years, if you went to university, and everything in between, about the entire idea that we're talking about in this book, which is the fact that we are all human beings sharing one single consolidated planet. In other words, world citizenship, world parliament, world governance, virtually nothing. I'm sure most people would say, I didn't receive any instruction on that my entire educational career. I didn't until I did it myself.
How much you were educated to defend your national interest versus to defend global problems.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, then it's going to be 99.9 versus 0.1, you know? I mean, there would be the occasional mention of maybe the UN or maybe, you know, some sort of geographical lesson about countries. But in terms of, you know, those people in Yemen, They are exactly like you. Those people in Indonesia are exactly like you. You know, those people in any country are exactly like you. That message, which is so obvious to those of us who know people from everywhere and who have traveled and who are interested, is not immediately obvious to a huge number of people still to this day. You know, it's like, oh, I remember even in developed countries, you know, I could give you 1,000 ideas, but one that just popped into my mind. I once had these guys in my house in Holland where I was living at the time, and they were doing some work on like fixing the pipes or something. And I was speaking to them in Dutch, right? And one of the guys said, he'd never been out of Holland, you know, kind of a basic guy, really nice guy, but, you know, not well traveled or anything. And he could tell I was originally American because of my accent. And he says to me, because Holland is a very big cheese eating country, right? They love cheese and they make great cheese, right? And he goes, do they have cheese in America? You know, and that's just one example. I could give you 1,000 examples, but so often, like at this most basic level, people just don't know. Like even now when it's so easy to travel, it's so easy to meet people from other cultures and other places, other religions, still a huge number of people on planet Earth have not really done that yet. And you know, it does help and it will help when more and more people interact with each other, more and more people get education about what's happening in the rest of the world. And that's ultimately, you know, and I think we'll end it here. That's what this book is about. You know, it's simply trying to say, whether we like it or not, we were all born in the same place. And that place is called Earth. There are 2 trillion galaxies in the universe that we know about that can be scientifically proven. A single planet in one of those galaxies happens to have life on it. That's our planet. So isn't that enough? Isn't that enough of a fact to understand how unbelievably lucky we are as a planet and as a species, that we should do everything we possibly can to make it as good as we possibly can, given the fact that we have absolutely everything we need on this planet to preserve and prosper life for millennia to come if we make the right choices and if we look out for each other. And that's ultimately, to me, what it's all about. It's about looking out for each other, realizing our common existence as humans with the very same needs and the very same wishes, and transcending all of the influences that have led us to make so many poor decisions as a species over time. All the wars, all the deprivation, all the violence, all the racial discrimination, all of these horrible things that humans have done to each other. We have to get past this. And we have to see ourselves as one entity, sharing one entity. And moving forward, we can't have this deluded wish that there's going to be a whole series of like islands of prosperity in the midst of a desert of deprivation of people, because that's what the global elite truly wants to have. They want there to be no sharing at all. I mean, just look at the policies of the United States right now. They want the ultra concentration of wealth and power among very few people. They will then break themselves off and form these sort of walled communities of ultimate luxury, and then everyone else will be outside the walls, you know? And there'll be these little clusters of prosperity all around the world, maybe 10 or 20 or 50. All the rest of humanity, 95%, 98%, will be living outside the walls, wishing to get in, but never being allowed in. That's the vision that a lot of these people have, and that's a vision we do not share. Our vision is one of one human race, just working together to find the best way forward, where human suffering can be reduced to the absolute minimum level, where prosperity can be increased and economic and developmental sustainability can be increased, along with peace and security for people everywhere. That's our quest with this book, One Earth, One Politics. We hope you'll have a look at it. It's available now on Ethics Press's website, also available through Amazon and other sources. So Pablo, thank you very much for writing this book together with me and for talking today about it. Do you have any final words for viewers today?
A real honor to have the opportunity of writing this book with you and discussing these topics. Even if we are a minority, we will our message. I think gets more important because of being against what you can hear today in the media and so forth. That is so childish and artificial and elusive of the big problems that we have in the world.
Absolutely. And if we all work together towards this, we can clearly build a really wonderful future. And the present is pretty good for a lot of people in a lot of places, but the future can be great for everybody if we all work together as one happy human family and put forward ideas and steps that will lead us to where we belong, which is a global democratic system in which all of us participate. So thank you again for watching Democracy Tomorrow. If you like what we're presenting, please subscribe. And we'll see you again at the next episode of Democracy Tomorrow. Take care.